You're listening to What's Wrong With This Picture? Freaky Films and Why We Frickin' Love Them. Hi, I'm Lindsay McCullough.
And I'm Gary Mulholland. And in each episode of What's Wrong With This Picture, we'll be looking at a movie we think is weird and wonderful. We sometimes do include the endings where it's key to what the film is, so please be prepared for that. So anyway, buckle up and join us on a journey to dangerous cities, suburbia, and other fantasy worlds. It's going to be a wild ride.
This time, we are looking at a double bill of films by the same director, Abel Ferrara. And those films are Miss 45, Angel of Vengeance, and Bad Lieutenant. And we decided to look at these. We saw these films kind of independently of each other, but they're both really weird. They're both really interesting. They've got some similarities, some common themes, but actually they're at quite different stages of Abel Ferrara's career, and that's kind of evident in the starring, that's evident in the money that's been spent on them. So, Gary, we're going to kick off with Miss 45. Give us the details.
So, Miss 45, Angel of Vengeance is a 1981 low-budget feminist revenge thriller directed by Abel Ferrara and starring Zoe Lund, a.k.a. Tamalis, as Thana, who is also known in the film as the seamstress or Miss 45. Lindsay, give us the plot.
So, a young woman, Thana, is a seamstress in New York City in the 80s, a very grubby New York City, it has to be said. And though she seems to get on well enough with her colleagues, she doesn't talk, so she's cut off from the people around her. She has one really bad day where she's raped on her way home from work. When she arrives home, clothes torn, body bleeding, she's faced with a man with a gun who's robbing her apartment. A struggle ensues, and now Thana has a gun and a thirst for revenge. Gary, what's wrong with this picture?
It's a very strange watch the first time, but in a really wonderful way. I think it was only his Abel Ferrara's second feature. And I guess the initial weird thing that hits you is the acting is amateurish, but feels deliberately so. He's just amazing at where he puts a camera. So you can see this is not somebody who's does not know how to make a film. It seems to be, but it is somebody who's working with a low budget. So that weirdness is lent immediately by the fact that he's a really accomplished, clever filmmaker, but is working within some quite, a small threshold of money. But also, he is very much a guerrilla filmmaker. And even when we get to his later masterpiece, he was very fond of going into his favourite place, which is Manhattan, New York, and with his camera crew and shooting guerrilla style without permits, whatever. And so therefore a lot of the people that you see in the film, they have no awareness that they were filmed, and they're therefore behaving like real people. And what you're getting every time you watch Abel Ferrara film, it seems, is a snapshot of exactly what New York was like at that time. And I guess the other second weird thing is rape revenge thrillers. There's been quite a lot of them by 2023, but there hasn't been a load of them by 1981. And, the most well-known one was probably I Spit on Your Grave by that time. But Miss 45 is like a cross between a feminist revenge horror movie, rape revenge horror movie, and a strange new celebration of fashionista New York in the early 1980s. And those two things keep kind of bumping into each other and creating sparks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would say that, all those things you find in a really great film, a great script, great acting, a relatable world, well-drawn, rounded characters. I mean, it really has none of them, and yet, it is a great watch, and it's a really enjoyable film. I guess one of the questions I was going to ask you at the end, but I'm going to bring it right up to the start, is it just exploitation or is it something more?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. It is absolutely exploitation, and it's absolutely something more.
Yeah,
I think
that's a great answer.
I think that is what, in a lot of ways, Abel Ferrara specialised in. You know, he did genre movies on one level. You know, he horror movies, slasher movies, vampire movies, gangster movies, but they were always seen through the lens of an art movie. He was always doing something completely different with that form that was uniquely his and about his worldview, which was shaped by New York, by punk to some extent, by Catholicism very, very deeply, and Catholic guilt, and by that whole part of by the whole idea of New York's underbelly. And sometimes in his films, New York's underbelly is what you'd expect, which is gangsters, and other times it's punk rock bands or no wave bands or alternative fashion houses like we have in this one. And it's he's always kind of celebrating New York, but at the same time critiquing it.
Absolutely. And I mean, New York looks filthy. And I know there is this kind of famous thing of, Times Square in the early days, and Giuliani, when he was actually a person and not a cartoon villain, kind of cleaned it all up and blah, blah, blah. And there is that kind of before and after Giuliani kind of thing. And this is very much in the before camp.
Absolutely.
Just even walking down the street, there's rubbish, there's filth, there's, it's kind of surprise everyone's not getting raped every day. It just looks like this horrible, horrible kind of world. No glamour. Yeah. Nothing at all around.
Except, of course, from Thana as the film goes on.
Yeah.
And I guess we'll come to that. But once he decided on this idea of women are hassled, what's the fantasy of what they would do about it?
Yeah.
He creates a New York where every single time a woman of any kind walks alone down a street, even in broad daylight, there is at least one man, probably more, who is just shouting at them, groping them, etc. It are absolutely out of control sort of landscape of men who just think they can abuse women willy-nilly and encourage each other to do it. Until such a point that when it becomes a revenge movie, you can be doing nothing else but getting up on your seat and cheering.
Yeah, yeah. And, Zoe Lunt was only 17 at the time that this was filmed, so she's very young, and she does bring that kind of vulnerability added to the fact that her character, certainly initially, is mute and doesn't talk. But yeah, so when she starts to take her revenge, actually, I just want to say one more thing about the film. Do you remember, I don't know if I'm dreaming this, but there used to be a show on a Saturday night, one of these kind of late night Saturday night shows, where some guy, I think it was, would take like an old B movie or a European movie and overdub it with just like a whole new story that was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what that was called.
I can't remember what it was called now. I think it was a thing, but I can't remember what it's called. This film reminds me of that because the acting across the board. I mean, Zoe Lund is she has to carry a lot of the film, and she does. Through her presence, I would say, perhaps more than necessarily her acting chops, but she does carry it. But like, there's a landlady who's terrible. There's her boss who's terrible.
Right, okay, I'm going to challenge you on this.
Okay,
I disagree. I think it's a particular kind of acting which is much more in the tradition of a sort of mix between John Cassavetes and John Waters. And therefore it is not about you're turning in a conventional, realistic, kind of down-to-earth performance. There's I think some great support performances in it, and they are exaggerated.
Yeah.
They are camped up, and that is deliberate. And I think the woman who plays the landlady is one. I think her boss is another.
Wow.
And I think the other one, who I think is excellent, is the fashion photographer who decides to hit on her and her friends in a cafe and pays for his He's a really nerdy guy. The thing is that they're sitting in the cafe having lunch from their job in the clothes factory, and this bloke there's a couple opposite them who are snogging to the point of ridiculousness, and our heroines are complaining loudly, and they're ignoring them, and then the woman gets up and leaves, and the guy immediately turns his attention and comes right over and is like, "Which one of you can I hit on?"
Yeah.
And they can't believe it. His it's like we say, it's an exaggeration of just how bad men can be. And he pays for his sins, but he has to. I think that's a selfless performance, because not only does he have to be, a sexist creep, but he has to have the bad curly hair and the really bad suit and the glasses. He isn't even remotely hot.
True.
And he's the really unattractive man who has somehow convinced himself that he's really hot. And it's a really selfless goofball performance, which I really like.
All right, I buy that. But I did. I mean, like I say, I did enjoy the film, but I kept being reminded of those European films in the 70s. I think I've mentioned this before, where everybody's speaking a different language and then it's overdubbed in English, and it did have that kind of feel to it. And I was like, is this just found footage? Abel Ferrara's just kind of
dubbed stuff over,
dubbed stuff on. But what I really like about Miss 45, and I think we'll see it in Bad Lieutenant as well, is that escalation. So she starts off.
Yes, exactly.
The second, is the guy she meets in her apartment just on the first day. So she's raped and then she goes home. Is that guy also a rapist, or is he just a robber? I think,
and this is also another thing, and I'm totally putting my hands up to this. The history, Abel Ferrara has been very much affected by censors.
Yeah,
in the years.
true.
And what you'd often find with his films is that they would get a release for theatrical release, but as soon as they were going to video, various countries would just butcher scenes out of them against his will, often without even his knowledge. So, of course, I think me and Lindsay both found versions of this film in the UK on YouTube. And there's a couple of really strange edits in it, and I'm absolutely looking at them and thinking, is that a deliberate choice of Abel Ferrara's? Because, he's capable of a really strange edit. Or has somebody just sliced an enormous lump out of this movie, or, and we don't know. Because I've never seen, if so, I've never seen the full version of Miss 45.
Because I had thought he was just a house robber. He was just like a home invader robber. But then a review I was reading was like, oh yeah, no, and then she's raped a second time. And I was like, well, I definitely didn't see that. I should have asked you before we started. Actually.
I think I'm going to go right out there and say that the version we've both seen on YouTube was cut for video release, because both of the most obvious looking strange edits are before rape scenes. One is in the alleyway where 1 minute is going to happen, the next minute it's happened, in the version I've seen, and the second one is he's come in, he's going to rob her, and then something starts to happen physically, and then the next thing he's dead.
Yes.
I think we've seen brutally cut versions.
Did you know that the first rapist is played by Abel Ferrara?
I did, yes. Although, I'm glad you brought that up because I'd forgotten. But yes, he's credited as first rapist.
First rapist.
He's a man in a mask, so you can't actually see Abel Ferrara's face. But
my point all those minutes ago before I got distracted by that was the escalation. So first she kills in self-defense. She kills this second. So the first rapist, I presume, gets away with it. I don't know if she ever kind of encounters him again. The second man in her apartment, she does kill after a bit of a battle, and as I said, now she's got a gun. So first she kills in self-defense, then she kills someone who she only thinks is trying to attack her, although actually because she's had to dismember this body, the guy that she's killed in her apartment, and she's dumping bits of it all over town, and a guy sees her drop a bag and is running after her saying, you dropped your bag, because it's like a body part. She thinks he's going to attack her, so he gets shot. And then she kills other men who are attacking or abusing other women. Then she just starts killing any man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Including
exactly.
the guy who's just snogging his girlfriend.
Yeah.
So that escalation until we arrive at the party scene, which I'm sure we will talk about in a bit more detail a bit later on, because it's such a great scene, such a great sequence, I should say. But just that escalation is something we'll also see in Bad Lieutenant.
Yeah, definitely. And along with the escalation of her crimes, I guess what we're being told is the trauma of those two attacks in one day. It's not just revenge in terms of I'm Charles Bronson and I've decided to get revenge. She's gone nuts. The trauma has sent her nuts. And once she kills one person and manages to get away with it, it starts to become she just wants to kill men, never women. But each killing is creative in the sense of, like you say, they escalate from, okay, we could totally argue that guy deserved it, whether, but each death is sort of, after a while, is a little less, in inverted commas, deserved.
Yeah.
Or the beautiful one, which where she starts talking to a guy in the Central Park on a bench at night, and he's telling her this story about he murdered his girlfriend's cat because she was cheating on him with a woman. He looks extraordinarily like the same actor that played the house invader. I was literally looking at him and going, is it the same actor? But anyway, and she suddenly gets her gun out of her pocket. She's decided, right, I've heard enough. This is it. And the gun jams, and he takes it away from her, and you're like, oh no. And she's sitting there going, oh no. And then he sort of gets the gun and actually puts it against his own head and blows his head off. And it's kind of, so she's even managed to sort of almost psych a man into what could be accidental death or what could be actual suicide.
Yeah. I think that in a way is really funny, because I don't know if you notice, he's talking so much. He's just yapping away.
Yeah.
He doesn't even realise she can't talk.
Yeah.
Because she's not talking, but he doesn't expect her to. And he's just yapping away.
And that's why these little bits of feminist, of thought are just woven into the tapestry. The man who talks and talks and talks and never listens. Me. And it's almost like a wish on the part of. It's the wish. Ferrara's really good at what he's good at is, let's face it, viewer, we've all thought this should happen. Now, of course, in our logical, rational, we're trying to get on with other people and get through life. We don't actually go and do these things. But let's face it, when you've met a particular kind of man, haven't you, every now and again, just thought, I'd love to whip a gun out and just blow him away. And he just goes with that and just commits to that idea. And in order to reveal a truth about the way this particular group of people behave and what a woman might feel about that and how she might react to trauma. And Lindsay, wouldn't you agree though, and this is the thing about the way some of these performances are and everything, Miss 45 is a comedy.
I think it's certainly got some funny parts. That guy just yapping away, I think is quite funny. And also her landlady has a dog who's very troublesome because she's storing body parts from the first guy in her fridge. And this dog is determined to get at these body parts in the fridge. So she takes the dog out for a walk, but then tries to take the dog out, and this dog will not die. Exactly. I think there are certainly funny parts, and I was thinking actually at the party scene, which we will come on to, there's kind of random party conversation going on, and one of these is somebody saying to this guy, "But you promised you'd get a vasectomy." And she doesn't even hear this conversation, but he does get killed later on. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, I wanted to ask you about the music. So I've written down in my notes, crazy soundtrack, electronic boings when she's playing with a gun. But for the most part, the music's like a mosquito all the way through. It's just buzz, buzz, buzzing in your head.
Yeah. Yeah, and the music. I and one of my favourite things, one of my favourite things about this film is, cause I'm afraid we have to go to the party scene. I know it's towards the end, but there's no way to avoid it. Is the band in the party scene? So there's a party which is, hey, this is a disco sort of thing, a very early 80s New York type of disco.
And it's a costume party.
It's a costume party.
Importantly.
Absolutely. And the band are just a stunning thing. They are what appears to be a three-piece band in terms of what you can see. And they're led by a saxophone player who is the full-on mullet kind of, experience. And for British listeners, you'll probably get this reference, at a drummer that looks like Terry from Brookside. And they're just so happy to be there, and but they're playing. They appear to have been hired to play one song for the entire night, and it just goes on and on and on. And but the brilliant thing about this sort of disco, sort of a punk disco track is the only way I could describe it. People who are really into late 70s, early 80s music would think of it as funky, no wave kind of punk funk. It's just wonderful piece of music, and I kind of managed to look it up somewhere, and it's actually called Ms. 45 Dance Party.
I bet Abel Ferrara wrote it himself as well.
Probably find out he did. The artist is someone, it was Jim something, and I'm afraid he's totally
well, I think when he's credited as first rapist, he's also Jim somebody. So I wonder if that's his nom de Miss 45.
Interesting. All right. Well, we may have to look that up afterwards. But the music is, absolutely, lots of saxophone skronks, and I think it's very heavily influenced by a very hip New York sax player at the time. Well, two actually. John Zorn and John Lurie from the Lounge Lizards, who went on to have an acting
Stranger
career.
Than Paradise.
Stranger Than Paradise. And that was very much the sound of New York, roughly bang at that moment, but the sound of alternative New York, fashionista New York, not New York that sold any records kind of thing. So it's very, very of its moment. And then, of course, you got this fantastic scene. It's not doing anything, but it looks so great. It's a Miss 45 walking across a big open space with the dog.
Yeah.
And she is a mile in the distance, and he just keeps a static camera there, and she's walking towards the camera across what looks like a car park, but could just be actually, waste ground. And she's walking right towards the camera to the point where she nearly kicks it over, and the dog nearly walks right into the camera. And it's just drums. And I don't even mean drums playing a rhythm. It's just a drummer playing randomly. Boom, 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 boom. It's just brilliant.
I love that. Her appearance changes as well, doesn't it? There's a real escalation. So she starts off very kind of young. She is young at the time. She's a young actress, and she's very much in the background, and nothing much to her. You wouldn't really notice her. But then as time goes on, that changes, doesn't it? It
does, exactly. And this is, I think, one of the biggest things that makes this a comedy. She's very, very unnoticeable. She dresses in a very plain, drab way. She doesn't do her hair. She doesn't wear any makeup. She's just, drab is the only way I could put it. Mousy. And as soon as she kills one person, she starts to dress a bit better, and then the next person, then suddenly she's got this amazingly cool black beret and these amazing fashionista trousers, and then she's all in a black duster, and then she's got this amazing blood red lipstick. Yeah. And of course, by the end, she's going to the costume party. She's got this sexy nun's outfit on, which is just Abel Ferrara manages to find a nun reference in every film he makes, pretty much. And his non-reference here is just brilliant, as she's basically sitting in front of a mirror in her sexy nun's outfit with a blood red lipstick, practicing gun moves in a sort of which is almost like it's almost like a parody, a very knowing parody of Travis Bickle in the mirror in Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
The man in the mirror practicing with his gun moves.
I guess it's not dissimilar actually
It's
to Taxi Driver, but very, very much lower rent,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is great.
Yeah.
But I like that idea of kind of self-actualization through homicide. That
Yeah.
you discover who you are.
Yeah, yeah. She discovers who she is through killing men.
Yeah, absolutely. So the party scene, it's a costume party. She goes as a nun.
Yeah.
I mean, carnage ensues.
That's the only way you can put it.
Do we want to say more than carnage ensues?
Well, we really, I should say to the listeners, we discussed beforehand, does this one have spoilers? We decided no. It's very hard to talk about either of these films without saying the endings are absolutely brilliant. They do not let you down. They couldn't be more different in a lot of ways, but they couldn't be more the same in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But the Miss 45 ending, without saying exactly what happens, is played for very dark laughter.
Yeah.
And I think is, again, I'm not sure how knowing a parody, but I think it's a parody of Sam Peckinpah.
Yeah.
With, all these people dressed in the most ridiculous costumes, suddenly slowed into slow motion as stuff happens.
Yeah.
And it keeps very morally within its purview.
I think that's fair enough. It's got a take, it's got a position, and it maintains that position to the end.
Exactly.
Let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Bad Lieutenant.
Okay then. So, Bad Lieutenant, Lindsay, who and what made Bad Lieutenant?
Bad Lieutenant is directed in 1992 by Abel Ferrara, so a good 9 years after Miss 45. It stars Harvey Keitel as the Bad Lieutenant. I should say many people in this film do not have names, and Harvey Keitel's character is always just called Lieutenant. Zoe Lund is in it. She's apparently called Zoe, although I don't think we hear her name, but obviously she's from Miss 45. It also stars Frankie Thorne as the nun, Eddie Daniels as one of the Jersey Girls, and Paul Hipp as Jesus. Gary, what's the plot?
Well, the lieutenant is a bad lieutenant. We know this because he steals drugs off the bodies of dead people, abuses his power to get free sex from sex workers, ignores his family, can barely manage 5 minutes straight before stealing more coke from scared drug dealers, and he pulls girls over in cars on flimsy pretexts before forcing them to perform sex acts for his masturbatory convenience. However, when a nun is brutally murdered in his New York precinct, he becomes obsessed with solving the case and heads down a nihilistic rabbit hole as he confronts his Catholic faith, the depth of his sins, and even Jesus Christ himself. The lieutenant is in possession of a one-way ticket to oblivion, and he bought that ticket from an illegal gambling ring who don't take kindly to losers who don't pay their debts. Lindsay, what's wrong with this picture?
Well, I mean, he really is the worst cop of all time, really, isn't he? A thief, gambler, drug addict, sex pest, flasher. When the nun is being examined, her rape exam, she's lying naked on a bed. He's kind of peeping her. Peeping her. He is constantly lurking.
Yes.
And so this kind of underbelly, this New York underbelly, and he is a policeman and he carries on his police work. He's investigating kind of other murders, but at the same time, the first time we see him doing his police work, there's kind of been a drive-by or something. There's a dead body in the car, and a sex worker says to him, "Oh, by the way, there's some coke under the back seat." So he kind of sources the coke while this is a kind of nominal crime scene. But there's a real counterpoint with his family. So the film opens with him kind of taking his sons, who are about, 12 and 8 or something, 12 and 9, dropping them off at school because they've missed the bus. They're barely out of the car before he's snorting some coke in his police car. This is 3 minutes in, so right from the start. And this kind of descent he's on, this immoral descent, as you say, into oblivion, into sexual guilt, into religious guilt, is really counterpointed with this very ordinary family. And there's a scene where he's passed out in the living room and he wakes up and he immediately goes to turn on the TV to the result of this game, one of the playoff games, which is kind of key to the plot. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
Yeah.
But I was just like, it's like living with a bear. I mean, he is so far removed from his family, and they're all sitting around kind of eating breakfast or doing what they do. And he is like this bear. That's the only way I can say it. It's like if you had a wild animal in your family, you'd stay still, you'd stay quiet, you wouldn't poke it, and it would lumber about its business. And that's kind of what he does.
Yeah, he's a monster of the id, isn't he?
Yes, yeah.
He's a monster of the id, and I think one of the key things about this is, before we go into sort of so much with going on with Bad Lieutenant, but it's got to be pointed out, Harvey Keitel has one of the greatest resumes of any actor of his generation. He's been so great in so many films, just off the top of my head. Holy Smoke, Reservoir Dogs, Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, the Piano. I mean, just brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm not alone in believing, and I'm really not alone in believing, this is his single greatest performance.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing.
It's a film, even though Abel Ferrara's direction and the story, the script he wrote with Zoe Lund are brilliant, and this film is dependent on Harvey Keitel and how much he commits.
Absolutely. I mean, he absolutely, I think it was Roger Ebert's review I was reading where he says he absolutely exposes himself, not just physically, which he does very early on. There's a very kind of a nude scene.
Yeah.
It kind of, although he looks amazing in it, I have to say, I mean, he looks incredibly sexy. When you see the picture, the still of it, it's an incredibly sexy body. But nonetheless, it's not sexy in the film because he's kind of, this is when he's with the two sex workers, and he's got his arms out and he's kind of stumbling and dancing. He's high, he's drunk, he's stumbling and dancing, and he's kind of crying and keening.
Yeah.
But this is like a full frontal Harvey Keitel that we're seeing, and it's a really, really powerful scene. So I was talking to a friend of mine and she sent me the still of him, and as I say, the still of him, he's a very sexy man, but that's not what he is in the film. No,
and context is all, isn't it? And he really does seem to reach into himself, Keitel, and pull, it's like Ferrara said, can you reach down into yourself and pull out the absolute worst? And not just worst as in behaviour, but worst as in the worst you've ever felt and can ever feel.
Yeah.
And that he's done it. And he got there, and it is one of those things, Harvey Keitel is, he's a taciturn, he's a pro. He goes, he does his job. He's not a great one for doing all the chat shows and sitting around, giving you his lovely anecdotes about how great he is and, how much weight he put on for this part and how much weight he lost for the other one because he's just so committed. He's not that guy. He will barely do interviews, and when he does, he'll say the bare minimum. So, but I would love to meet him just to say, how long did you need off after Bad Lieutenant?
Yeah.
Were you okay? Because I can't believe, and I know what you're going to say here, but I can't believe that he just switched off after that and went, yep, cheers, bye.
Was your guess of what I was going to say was he also made Reservoir Dogs in the same year?
It was.
So he also made Reservoir Dogs in the same year. So what a year that was.
I know. But his greatest year, I guess you'd have to say. And by then, he'd been an actor for getting on, for over 20 years. 25.
Yeah. Just to return to the film, I think there's a really great tension in it. It really ramps up. I think, we mentioned in Miss 45 the escalation of who she kills and why she kills them.
Yeah.
And there's an escalation here, or maybe it's a kind of downward spiral more, I don't know. But, he starts off snorting coke, and then he smokes crack, and then he smokes heroin, and by the end he's shooting up heroin.
Yep.
So it's just this kind of spiral in that way. But the kind of counterpoint to that is the tension that's about the baseball game. So it's the playoffs to decide who goes to the World Series. It's a fictional game. Apparently, this wasn't what really happened.
Yeah.
But it's the Mets, New York team playing the Dodgers, LA team, and it's a best of 7. So when the film opens, the Mets are down. Yeah. Is it the Mets are down or the Dodgers are down?
I can't remember.
Okay, but I think the Mets are down 3-0. 3-0. So
Yeah.
so the Dodgers only have to win one more to be four up, so they best of 7, so they win.
Yeah.
So there's this
That's
whole
right.
there's this whole gambling thing going on where he has bet against the Mets because clearly they're going to lose. They're 3 games down best out of 7, and he keeps doubling down, and not just his own money but other people's money as well. And so over the course of the film, we hear the results of these next 4 games. This tension just keeps ramping up. And at one point, he turns on his radio to hear the result, his police radio in the car, and then shoots it.
Yeah.
Because it's not the right thing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it becomes like this kind of thriller, this just what's going to happen in this baseball game. And it's a really great underscoring of what's happening to him.
One of the brilliant things I think about this film is that it's quite obviously more concerned with being, 1, a character study, and 2, a allegory about Catholicism, guilt, sin, and redemption.
Yeah.
However, there's still a good plot.
Yeah.
And there's still a good enough plot. It fits perfectly with the fact that before the film started, this man was hovering on the abyss.
Yeah.
What finally takes him down, and 2 events, the rape of a nun and this ridiculous baseball series, which defies all logic, and his insistence on gambling on it. And incidentally, one of the scenes that was shot, that actually, this is interesting because I do want to ask you about, there is a scene, there is 2 scenes of sexual assault against women in Bad Lieutenant. So let's take the first one. The first one was one that was censored for the video here, and it is an unknown assailant raping the nun. When you watched it, oh right, yes, 2 unknown assailants. Sorry, yes, you're right, raping the nun. What were your feelings about that? Was it gratuitous scene that you didn't really need to see, or was it vital?
I'm going to say, I mean, in some ways half and half. I'm going to verge 60% gratuitous, actually. I feel it did verge a little on the gratuitous side, that, she's a young nun, she's got a young body, and we see quite a lot of her body in quite a sexual way, actually. I think these days people, if they show rape, they show it very much more as a kind of violent act, But even, I guess, the year after, or maybe the same year, The Accused, yeah, that's seen as a violent act. It's not seen as a sexual act, and I think in this one, Abel Ferrara makes it a sexual act, which I'm slightly unnerved by. What about you?
Well, I would go with you that it's a stunning film, and Abel Ferrara has to make he's the kind of director, I'm not going to tell him what artistic choices to make. However, if we'd just got a news report saying a nun's been raped, I think that would have been fine.
Yeah.
I don't think we had to see it. And but I just thought it was interesting, a way to elucidate for listeners just what a well of confusion people who are given this bizarre role of being our moral guardians. This is James Furman, the head of Censor's, own quote about the fact that scene was not cut out, which would have been one thing, but a second of a male bum, basically, and about a second of some female underwear were cut out. And his quote was, "We didn't set out to make the rape scene less exciting. We set out to make it less sexually exciting."
What?
How many levels of wrong?
Bloody hell.
How many levels of wrong? It's this is a man put in charge of our morals. I just don't know where to start.
I mean, thankfully he's long dead and gone by now, I think, isn't he?
It must be. I mean, this was 30 years ago, but it's
that is outrageous, isn't it? I think. I mean, one thing that the scene has and needs to have is the religious aspect.
Absolutely.
So she is raped partially with a crucifix, which we don't see but we learn about, and that's the right thing. We need to learn about that because it happens in the church, it happens on the altar, and so there is a counterpoint between the nun and a statue of the Virgin Mary, which has been kind of knocked over. So obviously they are the same, they represent each other. I think it's important to see that scene in the church, to see it in situ, but I don't think we have to see the nun's kind of slender body.
No, I agree.
So I that would be my I think it is exploitative.
Yeah.
But
I'm not going to fight you on it. Yeah, I think you're right.
But then I guess the second scene of sexual assault that you're talking about is the Jersey girls in the car.
Exactly, and I think this is a scene that looms large for both of us. So I knew that we would be talking about it. I just think it's different. One of the reasons it's different, and I'm not saying morally better or worse, different to the other scene we're discussing. One, it's the actual protagonist, and we are looking at him as much as we are looking at the girls. Secondly, I'd never seen anything like that in a film before, and I'm not that familiar of thinking of a scene like it afterwards.
So, I mean, basically what happens is that he's, in his guise as policeman, and I say guise because it very much seems like a disguise. It's a way for him to get drugs. It's a way for him to extort people. He's called to a store robbery. He sends the store owner away to take a statement, and then he just shakes down the robbers for the money that they've just stolen. So it does seem like it's a handy way for him to live this degraded lifestyle.
To live a life of crime. And just to sort of say, just to absolutely make that point, this is Abel Ferrara himself from an interview on the version of the Blu-ray released in the UK, and talking about what inspired the original writing of the script with Zoe Lund. And it was, what about there is a character that had every vice rolled into one and a badge? That sounded like a fun character to me.
And then 20 years after that, we get The Shield. So,
yeah, absolutely.
However, where the protagonist of The Shield certainly had his crime, drug, sex issues, I don't think he does anything as bad as what the bad lieutenant does in this film, which is so he in his guise as a cop, he's pulled over two teenagers. They're meant to be, I think, but they look maybe slightly older than that. I think one of them actually, did you know this, was his actual babysitter of his own kids. Not in the film. Not in the film, but it was Harvey Keitel's own.
Oh, Harvey Keitel's. Not Abel Ferrara's. Right, okay, cool. Go for it.
So he pulls over this car because their light's out or something, and then he sees it's two young girls who don't know shit from Shinola in the vernacular. And they've been at a gig, they smoked a bit of weed, they've borrowed the car from their dad. I think they meant to be sisters, and he doesn't know anything about it. And so he's just like, well, I'm going to have to take you in, and I'm going to have to call your dad. I'm going to have to take you in. I'm going to have to call your dad. I'm going to have to take you in, unless there's something you can do for me. And what he makes them do is he makes one of them show her arse, and he makes the other one mime giving him oral sex. So he doesn't touch them, but nonetheless he kind of degrades them, all the while masturbating furiously against the side of their car. Yeah, what's your take on that one?
It's whereas it's weird. For me, that is one of the weirdest. I still remember in the cinema when I first went to see it, going, "What the?" I was shocked. I was 30 years old by that time. I'd watched a lot of movies. I'd watched a lot of horror movies. I'd watched a lot of movies that were deemed very, very controversial. All of the films that were deemed controversial, probably in Britain. And I was shocked. I was sitting there going, "Oh wow, what the hell?" But there is no scene. We are desensitized to watching men in films going around shooting people.
Yeah.
We just are. We are. From the minute you're about 3 years old, you're watching blokes running around shooting each other. It needed a scene that really, truly got over how corrupt this man was, how degenerate he was, and that scene did it.
Yeah.
It was the lowest. It was so low.
Yeah.
There was just nothing redeemable in that man after he'd done that. despite the fact that it's a film about redemption.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that made it incredibly brave. A brilliant piece of writing, incredibly brave. I hope the two real life actresses were fine, and I hope it wasn't too method. I don't know if there were women who watched the film at the time that were. Now there might be trigger warnings, I think, and back in the day, we never got things like that.
Because so many women have been flashed at or masturbated at. It's unfortunately it is a real thing.
But the women that I knew at the time, you included, who went to see that film, and none of them said, that film triggered me, or I felt it was a misogynist scene. It was a scene about misogyny rather than a misogynist scene. But that's very. Is it even? Of course, it's misogynist, but it's not. It's not how he hates women; it's how he hates himself. Yes,
that's what that scene is about, isn't it? Yeah. So I mentioned there was an actor playing Jesus, and this is part of his hallucination, part of his Catholic guilt. And interestingly, so it's his hallucination, but actually there's a very brief intercut of that during the rape scene, which he's not present at, and he doesn't know at that point anything about. But nonetheless, there's a little bit of Jesus there. I just in terms of the making of the camera follows him very, very closely. As you say, it's guerrilla filmmaking, shot without permits. So there's a nightclub that he's in, I think, to try and score some drugs, and it's a real nightclub. It's kind of like we talked here about Under the Skin, and Scarlett Johansson is just wandering through a real nightclub. And this one, Harvey Keitel, is just wandering through a real nightclub. There's a lot of film. A lot of the film is filmed from inside the car where he's driving in his cop stuff, or whether he's shooting the radio or just driving around town. A lot of it's shot from inside the car. We determined, no spoilers, there is a scene at the end where something, where there is a car and something happens within that car, and it's a long shot. We're seeing it from quite far away. It seems like there are real people reacting to what they assume is a real crime, and it's an incredible way to end the film. We're not spoiling what the crime is. It's an incredible way to end that film.
100%. There was a nice little documentary that I managed to find, speaking to the cinematographer. Sorry, I'm moving a bit away from the microphone there. But I was looking at my notes, and he was talking about the fact that Abel Ferrara's instruction to him he'd worked with Ferrara a few times. He knew exactly how he worked. And he said that basically he wanted the camera to be following Keitel around a lot, and that he wanted it to be a non-judgmental shoot. And by that, the camera was positioned in a way that it was subjective and not objective. And by that, I mean, it's like you're walking with Keitel all the time. It's like you're walking with him. And what you're not doing at any point, so you're in the nightclub, it's like you're squeezed in there with people. What you're not doing is sitting in a camera on the roof looking down at everybody. That's more of a judgmental and objective shot. The one truly objective shot is the very last shot. Which is a static camera set some yards away from the event that you're talking about. And as you say, is the activity around, considering the way so much of it was shot, is that activity around the car extras, or is it actually the reactions of people? And I kind of was sitting there looking at it and thinking, well, actually, to get people to stop and look in a car, you don't need, trying to avoid spoiler. You don't need something disgusting or grotesque in the car. You just need something a bit weird in the car. And then they would stop and look and go, well, what the hell is that? And a couple of them might point, and somebody might shout. Somebody say, what is that? But the other irony, which of course is completely unintentional, but the sign over the top of what everybody's doing.
Trump Plaza.
There you go.
He's parked outside. The car is parked outside Trump Plaza. I think it's real. I think those are real passers-by.
I think so. The reactions
because they don't just look curious; they look horrified. I think
they look confused.
Yes,
I think, and
Yeah.
I think I don't know how far he would go to put something in a car that would make people literally react with horror, but they definitely look confused and bewildered, and yeah, it's. I mean, you know, you mentioned the scene with Jesus. You know, a Jesus that is in Keitel's mind as he dips further into madness. And, you know, just mentioning scenes that I love, the intensity that Keitel has in that scene. And he's just bursting, crying and crying to the point where he can barely talk and going, where were you?
Yeah.
Why did you leave it all to me?
Why have I got to sort this out?
Yeah. Why have I got to sort my own life out? Where were you? And he's screaming it. I can't impersonate the scream.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know how to get there. It's
an absolute, it's an incredibly powerful performance. I mean, he's worked with obviously loads of people: Tarantino, of course, Scorsese, of course, Jane Campion, Jim Jarmusch, Wes Anderson, Paul Schrader. He's done hundreds of films, and I realised looking at it, there's so many of them I haven't seen that. I mean, I need to pull out. But what's your favourite Keitel performance outside of Bad Lieutenant?
Outside of Bad Lieutenant, I'm going to go for, and I realise it's a minority choice because, you know, Reservoir Dogs is obviously a very big one. Mean Streets is a very big one. But I love his performance with Kate Winslet in Holy Smoke.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the closest he's got to the self-lacerating, almost humiliating intensity that he reached in Bad Lieutenant. It's a film that not many people saw, even though, you know, Jane Campion has gone on to have this great career and whatever. For some reason, even with these two big stars in it, it didn't cross over, and it's just sort of disappeared, and you don't see it streamed anywhere anymore. If you ever do track down Holy Smoke, people, I really recommend it. It's such a strange film, and they're both amazing in it.
I remember him saying at the time that the fact that Kate Winslet kind of was able and willing to do a film like that kind of showed what a person and what a man she was. There was more to her than kind of the movie star, the Titanic movie star.
Absolutely.
I love Mean Streets, and I know everybody says it's Robert De Niro's film because he's got the showier part, the Johnny Boy part, but Keitel is brilliant in that. Really, really brilliant.
I agree. It depends on Keitel being good because for that one, De Niro does get to be just the chaos, the wild card. But Keitel's the moral centre of the film.
As he is, in a way, in Thelma and Louise.
Oh, of course, I always forget about it.
He's obviously not one of the stars, but he brings something to that. And I just love it. But, you know, he's great in From Dusk Till Dawn. He's great in Reservoir Dogs. He's okay in Pulp Fiction. It's a kind of comedy character that he does, but he's okay in
it's
that.
Kind of iconic.
The ones he did with Jim Jarmusch, Smoke and Blue in the Face, they're great as well. So he's just always, you can pretty much always depend on him. The Duelists, do you remember that?
Yeah, Ridley Scott's first film. Yeah.
You can always kind of depend on him, I think, to bring something.
And I think I was thinking about him, you know, because obviously, you know, I got into three actors, and I say actors, you know, as in male actors, at the same time when I was in my teens, that became, I guess, my iconic actors, and that was Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and Harvey Keitel. Robert De Niro and Al Pacino have, I mean, I know that, you know, they did their thing, and therefore they, you know, you earn the right to do whatever you like in your later life to make yourself money.
But they sold out.
But they completely sold out and have just been in so much junk. I mean, I junk, not just mediocrity.
God.
Junk.
They've won Oscars for it.
They won Oscars for mediocrity, but then they were in junk, like unwatchable films. You know, for every Heat, there was 10, you know, the Adam Sandler comedy where he plays his own sister and Alan Pacino comes on and does a song and dance routine. You know?
Oh, really?
That happened.
I was thinking Scent of a Woman, but okay.
Yeah, no, that's mediocrity.
Yeah.
I'm talking about unwatchable junk. Harvey Keitel look, I know he did an advert in the UK based on the Pulp Fiction character, so it's not like he doesn't ever do anything just for money. But he hasn't been in too many. I can't think of a film where I've been embarrassed for him. He makes solid choices. He didn't do an Adam Sandler comedy. He didn't do Meet the Fockers.
Yeah.
He didn't do total junk. And so Harvey Keitel, my respect for him has survived, whereas De Niro and Pacino's has kind of evaporated.
And they were all three in The Irishman, weren't they?
Yes, they were. Yeah, weird.
So there you have it. Then we are two Abel Ferrara films.
Yes,
different and yet similar in many ways.
Yeah.
Let's.
It's New York. There's nuns.
Yes.
There's chaos.
Yeah. There's guilt of some degree. There's all of that.
Yeah.
So let's score them.
Yeah. Okay.
So we will do. I think we agreed that we would do nuns' habits as they feature quite heavily in both films. So out of nuns, 10 nun habits for quality, 10 nun habits for weirdness. Let's do Miss 45.
9 nuns' habits for quality, and 8 nuns' habits for weirdness. I think, even though it is right, you could maybe, like, objectively, if you sat and watched Miss 45 and Bad Lieutenant together, you go, oh, well, Bad Lieutenant's a conventional film compared to Miss 45 is much weirder. I don't think it is, because I think in the context of a low-budget, almost guerrilla-style movie at that particular time, I don't think Miss 45 is that weird.
Yeah.
I think if you watch a John Waters film or a Larry Cohen film or an Andy Warhol film, you won't think Abel Ferrara's Miss 45 is completely out there.
Yeah, same. I think 8 for weird for me. I'm also going to go. I think 8 for quality, because for me, I do prefer Bad Lieutenant. I think that is the better film. It's had more money spent on it, but it's got Harvey Keitel, and while I'm a fan of what Zoe Lunt does in Miss 45,
it's not quite.
She's
same thing.
He's an actor, and we are seeing the depth of his soul. So I'm going to give Bad Lieutenant 8 for weird and 9 for quality.
I'm going to give Bad Lieutenant 10 for quality and 9 for weird. I do think it's a weirder film than Miss 45 in the context of what it's trying to say and how extreme it gets in trying to say it. And I do think, I really love Miss 45. I absolutely love it. I couldn't believe when I first saw it, the delight, and to watch it a second time and like it even more. I can't do anything else but give it a 9. Bad Lieutenant, I know I could take points off for problematic scenes. But it's one of the greatest acting performances in cinema history, and I'm really not exaggerating. And Abel Ferrara puts it into a perfect context.
Can't say fairer than that. Till next time.
Till next time. What's Wrong with This Picture is brought to you by Lindsay McCulloch and Gary Mulholland, and is recorded by Russ Keffert at Audio Egg. Music composed and performed by Russ Keffert.